From deep in the Burbank Media District, it's time for another edition of My Burbank Talks. This podcast is presented by the staff of My Burbank. Now, let's see what's on today's agenda as we join our program.
Hello, everybody. Craig Sherwood here with you once again, and along with, of course, Ross Benson.
Oh, I guess it's time for me to wake up and comb my hair.
And, and today we're here with our Mayor of Burbank, Konstantine Anthony. Mayor, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. I did not comb my hair.
I have that problem every day. But so many people, I don't have hair, but this mustache has to be perfect when I walk out of my house. So
Right, you get a lot of compliments on that.
I do.
For those of you joining us live right now on Twitter and Facebook, welcome. And hope you enjoy what we have in store for you today. We have some questions you guys have sent in, and we are now going to ask the mayor some of your questions. So,
Just to be politically correct, we got questions from you guys and gals.
guys and gals, from our readers and followers.
Yep.
Okay. So to start with, this came from Beck B, and she's asking, why is he for defunding the police? So, I think that's a huge, broad statement and means a lot of things. So why don't you say what you really meant when your tone on that?
Sure. So starting off with a softball question there.
Absolutely.
Literally. We won't throw you too. That's kind of a slow pitch.
Defunding the police. Yeah. So let's go back a bit. I ran for city council in 2020, middle of a pandemic. We all remember, as much as we'd like to forget. And during that time, and by the name of killed, there's no other way to say it, he was killed, and video surfaced of how he was killed, and people were very upset. People were very angry that someone who was sworn to uphold the Constitution and the freedom of the people to serve and protect had engaged in that kind of violence. Now, we know, this is statistical fact, that the vast majority of police officers in this country follow the rules, follow the law, do what they've committed to do. There's this saying, one rotten apple, get the second part of that phrase, spoils the bunch. If we continue to allow the rare officer to fall outside the rules, then we as a society are failing the individual members of that society. So a phrase came out during those conversations called defund the police. I think it took a lot of people by surprise, because for so many years, thinking was, well, all we need to do is spend a little bit more money to train officers on how to do their job. And in fact, personally, I don't think that that's a bad idea. I think all training is good, learning and understanding the world around you. But the job of a police officer, many years and even to this day, has very little with regards to time. Granted, there's ongoing training once you are an officer, but it's one of the jobs that you can get by simply starting a course, going through the academy, and then getting hired. Not to say that that in and of itself is a problem, but I think we have to be very careful about what we say is good training and is bad training, and that is a conversation we're still having. Separate from that, the role of a police officer in our society in the last, I'd say, 50 years has really expanded. We see it very clearly here in Southern California, especially in Burbank, where we as citizens see every little thing that happens on the street and we call 911 and we want a cop to show up. Most importantly, has to do with homelessness. We see someone who's sleeping on the street. We see someone who's having a hard time. And our instinct is to dial 911 and say, hey, can a police officer come down here and help this person out? And look, I'm not saying that that's a bad response or an instinct for a human being. So I was born in 81. I was raised in the DARE program. I was raised to believe if there's a problem, get somebody in a uniform, get somebody with a badge. They know what to do. So it's not, you know, outside of our realm to think, well, that's what the average person is going to do. And I don't fault them for that. But I've had conversations with police officers in our department who tell me they're not trained to do that kind of outreach. That is not why they went to the academy. That is not why they are there to help people, to protect people, to stop crime, um, to really change the safety and security of our streets person by person. I was told one time, you're interacting with a police officer, it is likely the worst day of your life. You are just gone through. Now you have to deal with something. And our officers know that. So when we say defund the police, we're really looking at our police budget and saying what jobs, what occupations, what responsibilities are we putting in a police department that could likely be better served by a different department or by different workers. Let's really maintain the law and order and the safety and security part of policing to those officers who do it. So specifically in Burbank, my first budget, my first year in council, we tackled overtime and workman's comp. And I know it sounds kind of bureaucratic, but when you really look at how you budget an officer's time, you don't want them out on the street 18 hours. That is, the likelihood of them doing something inappropriate or wrong increases with the amount of hours that they're on the clock. The human mind has a harder time making good judgment when it's exhausted. So by really dealing with the hours that they worked, we really cut down on overtime, and we really cut down on the individual safety of the officer, looking at the time on the job, but plus also the policies that we have. Workers' comp was very, very high before I got into office. And to the council before me, I give them a lot of credit, really changing policy and dynamics to make our officers actually safer. And by making them safer, the cost of insurance and workers' comp and all that came down.
And when you say that, I nowadays, Greg and I've been around this town for me 60 some odd years. When they were over on Olive, 272 East Olive, yeah, they didn't have half the things that, you know, they have to do now. When they moved, a big one is mental health. When you say mental health, not only mental health of people that they're serving, but their mental health. And there were not supportive, psychologists, a department psychologist. You know, I happen to talk to a lot of officers. What they see, the regular human being couldn't handle. I have talked to officers, domestic violence, meaning, just husband, wife. But, honestly, when they walk into a house, you see the dishes that have been piled up for a week, you're walking through maggots or cockroaches, and this is how people live, and they have to shut that all off. They're there for a task, and it takes a toll and it's finally now there is peer support, and there's a lot of things that they're doing that make it a lot different for an officer to handle his job, and that's, you're right. In our whole country has changed, but a lot of people I don't think realize here in Burbank, we're a little different than just a department away.
Yes.
We have a chief that came from LAPD. He has, not only the history with LAPD, but his grandfather, had, and he saw, and when he came here, it's totally different. He's looking at it totally different. He's one that really does understand mental health and so forth. But yeah, when some of the officers, we listen to the calls. and they're going on really high strung calls.
Yeah, and they're being called into these places that sometimes they've never prepared for. Um, so having that support and having that understanding is important. But at the end of the day, why we say defund, what we actually mean is to fund the other services that can prevent that from happening. We talk about, an officer of the law being the last resort. Well, what was the first resort? Why didn't we have mental health in the schools? Why didn't we have social workers talking to people before they became violent? Why didn't we have a Streets Plus team like we have now talking to our folks who are living, on the and in fact, we expanded Streets Plus in this latest budget because we know that these preventative factors really do cut down the number of service calls, the number of 911. And it's little stuff like that. I I always bring up the animal shelter and animal control as a win. That was $2.5 million that we took from the police department budget and put it in the parks department. And when people complain to me that, oh, I defunded the police by $2.5 million, that's your phrase that you're using. What we did was create a system where they could get more volunteers through the parks department, do a better job serving the community without having to go through the process of having a sworn officer and a badge, being able to deal with. I mean, it's lost kitties. I mean, it's stray dogs. Like we don't.
Yeah.
It's
And how it was before, because I go back with the animal shelter years and years, and how it was just formed and how the city did it. That was under Scott LaChosse was one of his first things is to shift it. Craig and I talked about it. We didn't think, animal control going under Parks and Rec was going to work. Honestly, I listened to them. I talked to them. Um, but again, times have changed. Um, they're now wearing a khaki shirt or a polo. They're totally different. They're doing a lot more things with Park and Rec that they did when they were just animal control. And look, I just read that all the great things that our animal shelter, with help of the volunteers and so forth, they're doing, such as they're now doing a vaccination clinic in house. We never saw that. I remember years ago when they used to do it at the fire station, the line of dogs would go out the fire station, down the street, around the corner. They'd have 500 dogs. Now, one of the services that they provide, you can schedule to get, and it's a lower cost. It's not instead of you going to your vet, but there, what a great idea. I didn't think it was going to work. I'll be the first to say it. I really, we listened, and I've talked to several of the officers. They're enjoying it. They were in fear too. Nobody likes change.
right.
Nobody
I
likes
think what you
change.
have to also most of the people stayed in place. They didn't like
Right.
everybody leave and they brought new
They
people
brought in
in.
more.
It was they brought in more, but the core people are still there. And I had an experience with them. We're trying to find a buddy for Dodger, and they were they were great with me. It was a really good experience. Didn't work out because Dodger said no. I got to live alone, but it was a great experience. But I think that the core people were all there, and I asked how long we've been. I see familiar faces, so it's worked out well. I think some things, sometimes we have to wait and see. And in this case, good decision.
So right there, like you said, that $2 million you took out of the police budget, but that now gives them a captain and everybody else um, a different eyeball on how to handle shelter, and that frees those guys up to do. I've taken criminal justice classes, and people don't understand. Police officers are basically hired to be a great report writer.
Do the
It's
investigations.
you're not chasing bank robbers 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. Some of the calls that they go on, are pretty. My neighbors move my trash cans here in this city, but those
Welcome
are
to Burbank.
exactly. But again, Burbank has to look at it differently, and I think, as we always say, you drive into this city, people tell me all the time it's different because we don't have Tent City. We have Street Plus. People need to learn. You can call Street Plus if you see somebody homeless. I reported last week the Burbank app, 311 app. Guy had taken over a bus shelter and he was there for a while. I put it in and Street Plus went out and talked to him. They sent me a report. We took care of it. We dealt with the person. So it's things like that that
And we've just moved forward this year on our budget to hire a third-party contractor to do our parking. And with the same exact budget that we would contract for our own police department to do it, we're getting, I believe, almost 50% more personnel, and they're going to generate more tickets and more revenue and make sure that folks aren't staying past the 1 hour or 2 hour mark. This was a huge problem in Magnolia Park and downtown San Fernando, where folks would park and stay because they knew they weren't getting tickets, right? People knew. And so now we're starting to really tackle that issue with the same cost, only more effective. And so the last thing I would say is two things I'd like the folks of Burbank to understand. Every year since I've been in office, as a share of the whole budget, if you look at the entire budget of the city, before I got elected, the police department was almost 33% of the budget, general fund revenue, the money that we can choose to spend. There's a lot of stuff we have to spend. Of the general fund budget, police was 33% of the budget. This most recent budget, about 28%. Cut police funding from the general budget. Haven't changed the number of 160 the whole time.
yeah, we reported last night. They're only down 12 officers. A lot of people say, "Oh, half the departments everybody's working overtime." We read the reports. Those are all public information when HR sends it to the city manager, and we read those. And we said last night, fire department has 0 vacancies, police department, and there's 3 in the academy, one being background being checked. They've now do tests all the time. Back to Laz parking control. We talked about it last night. 10 o'clock at night, I heard them get dispatched. We listened to parking control. Before that was an officer's job. It was very low priority, but you had an officer go do that, which meant detail time. Which now during the day, this parking control, you call for a parking complaint, it's being looked at within 10 to 15 minutes.
They're out there.
They are. It's going to take, again, nobody likes change, and it's a change with them. It's a different company. Yes, they're not city employees, but it's working out. And then, we're going to futurely here look at some of our downtown parking where you can only park for so long, and now we have a way to get that revenue. People don't realize that money, people are even asking, money doesn't go to Burbank. Yes, it does, folks. That goes to our general fund.
Yep.
You
That
know,
is general fund revenue. And I will point out one thing. I know people talk about we're being short staffed, certain number of officers. The budget every year, we don't take into consideration the short staff. We have the allotment of the number of officers we require, 160. If we're short staffed, that money stays with the department so that they can hire those people. We don't go year by year and say, well, you don't have enough, so we're not going to give you. So the conversation about how short staffed they are is irrespective of what we've earmarked every year for the budget. So we've always maintained 160 officers for over a decade now, I think. Um, and that number hasn't changed. And so we know that looking at insurance and workers' comp and overtime, the animal control and the parking enforcement, all of these little things that are in addition to, protecting and safety, all of that stuff is the issues that we've been talking about for years now. This is what 2020 was about. Um, I will point out that in Pasadena, weeks after George Floyd was killed, there was a gentleman who was pulled over for a traffic violation. And in that incident, he was killed. And so when we look at all this extra stuff that we ask cops to take care of, we are creating a society, or what we have done is create a society where there is continuous law enforcement involved in every. And in reality, like a traffic violation is a fine. There's no jail time. Nobody ever gets arrested for running a stop sign, right?
Right.
But we've in our minds, in society's greater understanding, we think of the maximum punishment needs to come down hard on every little thing, and it's like, look, people make mistakes. I ran a stop sign when I was 22. I actually didn't see the stop. There was a bush covering it. Was up in Stanford. I was visiting Stanford, and there was a tree covering it, and I ran right through it. My friend who was in the car, she didn't see the stop sign either. Uh, so people make mistakes, right? And so we got to understand that there's greater societal good when we start to invest in the things that get people to pay attention to their lives. If we had built that street with a speed bump or a traffic circle instead of a stop sign, right? Would it have prevented any of this from happening? Would it have made us safer? If we invest in mental health, if we invest in extracurricular activities for schools, invest in parks and all of that other stuff, do we keep our police simply for the very heinous? Would still happen, right? People are still people. There's always going to be bad folks out there. But how do we make sure that that is the last resort and not what we've, as a society, have created as the first?
Yeah, you hear it all the time. I hear it from people. Burbank used to, Burbank cops don't go into Burbank because they'll kick your butt and ask questions later. Well, you can't do that anymore. Everybody is protected. They can't just stop you because the third bolt on your license plate is loose. But if you don't have a tail light, it gives them PC, probable cause to stop. And they go through training to learn who to stop. And I happen to know here in Burbank, when they stop you, they run your plate. If you come back, your car registers to Burbank. If it comes back to other parts of LA, what are you doing in Burbank at 2 in the morning? And that's it. I think I've heard people along Magnolia Park complain, you know, but you know what? You can't have a police officer covering all 17 square miles of Burbank on every street corner.
Asking every single person, what are you doing here? What's going on?
Yeah,
It's tough.
it is. So,
Okay,
oh,
Anyway.
we got to move on here because question one took a long time. But kind of talking about our parking, what we're doing about parking. Beck also wants to know: will he continue? Now he continue. The mayor does not do things on his own to start with, So will Burbank continue to keep motorhomes off the streets of Burbank, only allow permitted vehicles so that we don't wind up like the city of Los Angeles?
See, I always question when people don't want us to end up like the city of Los Angeles, because the city of Los Angeles is very big. There's some very nice parts of LA. Like, do you want us to not end up like Brentwood? Because Brentwood's great. And I used to live in Brentwood. Um, so one of the issues I think that she's talking about is we have, not just because we haven't had parking control officers for a while, but because of the pandemic, because of the increase in homelessness, we have backed off the enforcement of motorhomes on the streets in Burbank, and a lot of places have done that. We know that this is where people are living. We know that there's people sleeping on our streets, not necessarily on the sidewalk, but in an RV or a motorhome or a van. And so there has to be a little bit of sympathy for folks who this is their last resort. And, I'll tell you, I've spoken with these individuals. Many of them, their previous residence was in Burbank. So these are Burbankers who don't want to leave our city. This is where they grew up. This is where they went to school. Um, but to Beck's point, we are very much interested, I think, as a council, looking at the safe parking space at the store on Front Street. There was a discussion item at council a couple weeks ago to investigate the feasibility and the possibility of taking a chunk of that parking lot, which is under city control and turning it into a safe parking space. I think that would be the best way moving forward. Um, you know, first of all, because that way people aren't scattered throughout the city and pay to get the services. Also, if you're parked on the street, you block the street sweeping, and what happens if your car breaks down there? Now it's a sort of a hazard. So all of the benefits of a safe parking site, I think, is really going to help us out and get people to a singular location so that we can start to offer them all the services that we provide, not just through Streets Plus, but through our great nonprofits.
Well, I will say, your fellow council member, Nikki Perez, has a lot of background in this.
Oh, yes, yes, yes.
That's what she's done.
The social worker, yeah.
Exactly. And she gave, people envision, you know, Motorhome City and a mess. They have rules and regulations. She made it real clear that, you can't stay overnight and you have to go for the services and so forth. Which, again, people need to realize we're not just jumping into it. You guys are doing your homework and you're going to do it right. It might take a while to figure it out, but folks, drive down any street of Burbank and you tell me where there is a problem, because I hear, and if there are people in motorhome, Street Plus knows who they are. They've gone out and talked to them. They're not just, not living, properly and so forth. But folks, drive down Forest Lawn Drive.
Oh, yeah.
This is less than 1,000 feet out of Burbank, and you want to take a look at how it's being handled there. You won't see that in this city. I was going to say, I looked up as you were talking, Street Plus, and I'll put the phone number out there. It's 818-237-8195. Again, that is 818-237-8195. And that's to Sam Merritt. He's the operational manager currently. If you see somebody homeless, that, or you can use your 311 app. That gets handled the next day. But Street Plus is really, as we have found, it started off small downtown.
We've expanded it twice now.
They have vehicles in town. They're driving around. They're checking on our homeless, and that's why Burbank is different. And I think that's why, to answer her question, no, it's
Last thing I just want to say, remind the community, a motorhome is still a motor vehicle, so it still needs its licensing, its permits, its plates, all of the things that are legal. Like, there's no way we can ignore that as a city. So they're still going to have to go through the motions, and we're going to do it all above.
And even yesterday, I heard the traffic lieutenant send somebody, an officer out, one of his motors, to look at a situation because they had called him and they wanted to get an officer's opinion on it. And they went out, and if they have to be watched by Street Plus, it starts at, that old line, you see something, say something, bring it to the city's attention. The 311 app is great for that. But if they don't know about it, folks, take your part, keep the city like we want it.
Okay. Well, we're going to move on. Beck has one more question for you. And it says, what will he do? Once again, what will he do? What will he do to retain our firefighters and police officers when they keep recruiting them and train them? And then after a couple of years, they leave for other departments for more money and better environment. Now, I don't know if she's aware that you just recently negotiated a fantastic contract with the firefighters. They're very happy. They're very content. And I think the police department's about ready to come up for a contract renewal. So I think you actually are making sure as a council that our city does have good first responders. So
Yeah, our goal is twofold: recruitment and retention. And we see this in a lot of the city departments. In fact, we're not the only ones, even in the county, that are having a problem with recruitment and retention. So we have redesigned our model for benefits and pay in the hope that what we're offering now is going to keep our folks here in the city. And yeah, I will say I have heard through the grapevine, through anecdotes, that the fire department is very, very pleased with the new contract. So I'm very interested in seeing what the Officers Association is going to bring to the table when we have our.
So that brings me up to a question that I've heard from officers. For recruitment for police officers, it's very hard right now to get a police
Oh,
officer.
that's nationwide.
It
Absolutely.
is. It is. But I guess Burbank offers some of the benefits are overtime pay, vacation pay. Why don't we, we just put $500,000 away for some people that are getting evicted. Why don't money talks, and why can't we come up with an incentive, a hiring bonus to get some of these? And we
So
had Sam at the Road Kings car show say, we just don't take anybody. We don't want to just fill seats, fill positions, fill cop cars. We want to get the best. But again, I remember asking police administration once, when you for an officer to lateral because he's doing it for money, you got to look what's really going on. Why is he running from one department? Is it just for that $5,000 that he could buy a boat or something? But I'm thinking for some of these, you know, other people out there, these guys that are coming out of the military and so forth for a cash bonus.
so I'll tell you, we have an excellent team at the city that deals with this. Betsy McClinton is an excellent of our recruitment and retention ideals. She has been working with all of the labor unions to figure out best practices. I'm not going to sit here and speculate like I know what is going to fix the problem. But I will say the last handful of contracts that we've done, everyone has walked away from the table very pleased. I have no doubt that we're going to be able to do the same.
Okay, great. Well, we're going to move on to Barbara, and Barbara
Barbara,
has
Barbara.
yes, she has two questions, but I think we're going to kind of combine them into one because it's pretty much the same topic. So she asked, has any council members talked with any school board members? And I think she's here talking about the redistricting and that entire thing going on right now. And but the council members talk with the school board members to see what lessons they have learned from the process and what questions they wish they would have asked the community and demographer prior to making a decision that might make a more enlightened decision. And she goes on to say, to clarify, are the proposed maps ba- are the proposed maps based on current population or on populations with the anticipated new apartment and condo developments? Are the new confirmed construction developments noted somewhere on the maps?
So I'll take those. I'll take both questions in reverse. First off, proposed maps currently being submitted to the city do not have the new population growth numbers. However, once council is allowed to make a decision, we are able to adjust for incoming population. So once the council is happy with a specific style of districts and map, we can go in and say, okay, where are the neighborhoods that are having, a bunch of housing being built and that kind of stuff. And I know there was a map, couple of maps that we looked at where each of the districts had its own housing project built. So they kind of cancel each other out. But if we do end up in a place where one area has a higher number of growth, expected growth, there's the state law allows for us to project that and sort of reduce one population in favor of another, knowing that growth. So that is part of the process, and we'll get to there at the end. But for now, all we want to look at first off is what do the districts look like? Who do we want to keep together? Do we want to keep it easy for people to, canvass and knock doors and get in contact with their elected representative?
And something we should bring up in this is, and we talked about last night, and we know the council was talked about is this has not been decided. They're going to do it. The city website says you voted unanimously to do this, but you voted
That is,
unanimously to look at the process, not to do it.
Yeah.
That
I
still
will
has to come
remind
back to the
everybody we
council.
have not voted to guarantee this yet. As a side note, there is currently a lawsuit in Santa Monica. Santa Monica was being asked to go to districts as well, but at the end of the day, they couldn't come up with any style or drawing of a map that could satisfy the lawsuit. Basically, they couldn't cut up Santa Monica into pieces where at least one district would have a majority minority population. And unfortunately, in Burbank, we can't do that either. So we're kind of stuck um, creating maps that don't follow what the lawsuit wants us to do. And so I personally, this is separate from me as the mayor, as a Burbank resident, I'm very interested in seeing what comes from this lawsuit. That'll be at the end of the month. I think what happens with this lawsuit with Santa Monica, because it may very well drastically affect what we're doing in Burbank. And honestly, I'm not saying it will, but it could put the kibosh on this whole thing. And we may have wasted all this staff time and all this money
Oh, poor Nick Gutierrez is going to be very upset to hear
for
that.
nothing.
We're sort of finding out who he is. We can't find out.
I don't know.
We've put feelers and searches out, and
But look, here's another thing though. I got to take my hat off as a elected representative for a second and just talk about someone who has canvassed the city. Um, I knocked doors for my first council run, 2017. I knocked doors for Measure I, Measure QS, for Measure RC, for my own council run, and then in 2022 for all of the other folks who were running. I have knocked on almost every single door in the city at one point or another. For me, districts on their face seem to be a better and easier representation. I understand the argument of, well, no, we want to elect people who represent the whole city. I get that. But you'll note that currently all 5 council members sitting on the dais in Burbank have at one point or another collectively each have raised over $50,000 before they got that seat. $50,000. That's a lot of money. If you divide the city up into 5 districts, well, then that means $10,000 wins you a seat. Imagine the kind of candidates that we can field and that we can run and who can get elected if $10,000 is the threshold. And at that point, you can get 2, 3, 4 people on the ballot. Each could raise 10 grand, no problem. And now you can pick from a wide variety of folks. And at that point, the best candidate wins, not the person who raises the most money. Because if you raise 50,000 and you only need 10 to win, you've wasted $40,000. For me, it's about the best candidate winning, not the candidate who raises the most money. And I firmly believe that going to districts will fix that. That is a totally different conversation than what is happening in the lawsuit. And so I'll see what happens in Santa Monica, but
I think there's pros and cons both ways. I really do. And in fact, there was at one time people even said we should elect a full-time mayor.
that's a conversation we're having as well. Yeah.
As part of this process. Now, of course, our city manager kind of acts like a mayor because he actually does run the day-to-day operations of the city. But I still think it's something that, and
Pasadena has a full-time mayor.
yeah, and they have a city manager, correct?
They do have a city manager. They're basically like
I don't lose Justin. Justin does a tremendous job in this city. I'd hate to lose that guy.
But it's more of a partnership between their full-time elected mayor and their city manager, which we do that partnership as well. But we're like Glendale; it rotates every year.
Right. Then it also would mean that we'd have to then budget for a full-time mayor, and instead of just the small stipends you guys all get as council members right now, so that would be another additional expense.
And last thing I would say, I want to say one last thing before we move on. The school district has to look at very different things. So their map, from what I understand, is it has a bunch of the schools are all separated. It tries to keep no more than 2 of the same grade level school in each of the districts. So their map is going to look very different than ours. And so no, we can't look at the school district and say, hey, what did you guys do, and copy their answers, right? Also because the school district.
I find that though it is kind of my state senator here is not the same state senator up on the Hill area. I have a different state senator. I don't have Senator Portino in my part of Burbank.
Oh, I think it was redrawn. I think we do have everybody in.
No. Now I have it. It used to be all in Burbank. I used to have Adam Schiff was not my congressman until this last recycling.
Oh yeah.
And now he is.
Right.
So I think it might be confusing down the line though if we have separate districts for schools and for city council And then people are going to get confused. Well, what district am I in? Why isn't this district the same as this? I think that that's something down the line that might be the average person is going to get confused about. So
I hear you.
I apologize for not knowing my state senator's name. It's Caroline
Well, it's Caroline Menjivar.
Menjivar. I always have a problem with the last name.
Yeah.
I haven't met her yet.
Yeah.
I hear she's doing a great job. So
She's pretty good. I'll try to get her on.
oh, absolutely, absolutely. Okay, let's move on to our next question here.
The next one's a smoking question.
Oh boy. Well, Pablo wants to know: can you ask the mayor if he supports allowing weed shops in Burbank? So once again, that's another issue. That's like our gun stores. That's another one of those kind of charged up issues. So what say you, Mayor, about weed shops?
Well, Pablo, if you saw my website when I was running in 2020, I do support the sale of recreational marijuana in Burbank. I'm very much in favor of having brick and mortar shops do that service. And my biggest argument for it is that if you cross the border, if you just cross Clybourne, you will find a number of weed shops that are right there waiting to service people in Burbank.
Well, you say across Clybourne. If you go Clybourne by the airport, San Fernando Road, that part of Clybourne is in LA.
Yeah.
It's the east side of the street, as we call it, east side, and there's a marijuana shop there.
Yep.
So they are pretty close. Yes.
And the thing is, they do deliveries into Burbank. Technically, our city code doesn't allow that. But like, how are you going to enforce that?
Yeah, you gotta have somebody have checkpoints at every road in the city and
Right.
say, what's your purpose here? Where's your papers?
Exactly.
I being a longtime citizen and knowing a lot of the older folks, I hate to call myself now part of that older population, but I don't know if the Burbank, you get feedback from people. I don't think you'll get the support from the residents yet. We still are a bedroom
I know.
small community.
And for me, I wouldn't want to move forward on this until we do a citywide survey.
Oh, definitely.
So we had a citywide survey last year on a number of other issues. And for me, if we were to go forward with this, I would do a full community survey about what people would want, how it would look like. Do we have brick and mortar shops where you can just walk in and buy? Or do we simply have it where it's a delivery service and you can only purchase through delivery? And that way there's no street interaction, there's no foot traffic, kids aren't walking by and seeing it. So there's so many different levels. And you can go even the full other extreme where they actually have smokehouses where it's on-site consumption, like we do with a hookah lounge or something like that. So there's so many varied different styles of that. I wouldn't want to go forward unless we do a full community survey, ask people what they want to do, if we want to tax it the way other places have been taxing it. Because if that's the case, then we would have to go to a ballot measure and put that on the ballot. So it's like, it's a whole bunch of questions. But me as an individual, I think that the use of recreational marijuana actually has been proven to reduce opioid addiction, methamphetamine use. And those are two very big problems we have, not just in the city, but all over the country. And so how do we regulate that? How do we make it safe? How do we make sure that kids aren't wandering in and using it? If there's a conversation to be had, I'd like to do it citywide. I wouldn't like it to just be 5 council members sitting up debating on our anecdotes that we have. I want to do a full survey. I want to do a study. And look, if at the end of the day the survey comes back and it's like 80% of the city is like, no, sorry, we don't agree with you on that, then I'm like, okay.
Well, I will say when you do a city survey, the police chief brought it up, that garbage collection was higher on survey than police officers, when they did the last survey. So I wonder what numbers you'll really get.
Right.
People's trash collection still might be over marijuana stores.
One thing I will say though is if we do ever go through with that, let's not make the mistake they did in the past and just all of a sudden let 30 shops come in.
Oh,
Let's
yeah.
let's say, no more than
Limit.
3.
Definitely
No more
a
than
limit.
3 in the city, and that's it. And somebody goes out of business, another one can come in. But like the gun shops, I think we should have more than 5. And once they shut down, until we get to 5, nobody can get in. So
Yeah, we definitely. I mean, personally, I would like to include that in the survey. How many, where? Because there's ways of doing it so they can't get a permit to open up near schools or near parks.
We
Um,
have some industrial
Definitely
areas,
industrial areas. Yeah,
like
yeah.
Golden State, that they're now looking at. A lot of that is industrial. I mean, we're totally different, away from residential, away from parks, away from where it might be.
and
Uh,
there is a lot of these pot shops are getting robbed because they keep cash because they can't use the
Oh
federal
yeah,
banking
that's a
system
whole
because the
other
federal
problem.
government doesn't. Now, if the federal government does recognize the legality of weed, then suddenly you might have it might be a different conversation then,
yeah,
So, but
Absolutely.
right now, that's the
big,
whole thing.
big
But
shootout last night right here, Coldwater and Victory. It was at a smoke shop. Now I don't know all the details yet. I don't know if they sold pot there, but left two people dead. And I know that's what a lot of people you know think about is
It
the
worries
safety.
me. It definitely worries me. Yeah.
It brings in a different clientele into our city, that it's not the residents that are buying, it's people coming in. And look at the majority of our crimes are people. We have the 5, the 134. Chief has always said that corridor off the, East Valley. Let's just stop in Burbank.
That's why I think at the level of no, you can't buy it in person, but allowing for deliveries, I think would really address that. That way, only the folks in the city who are consumers of it are the ones purchasing. You're not going to get people, jumping off the way, stopping by and doing some window shopping. So I think there's a level that would that everyone can get behind. We just have to find what that level.
hey, well, that's great. Before we go today, I've got a couple quick questions for you.
Yeah, sure.
One being, I saw the other night that you stopped by the school board meeting and addressed the school board. Number one, how did it feel to be on that side of the dais instead of up on where you're supposed to be? And what was your motivation for going and speaking at the meeting?
Is it really? They change that background. They draw the
They pull the
drapes.
curtains. Yeah.
You don't know that you're in the same room. That's Craig and I said your house.
Right.
It's totally different.
Yeah, some people don't realize the school board holds their meetings in City Hall in the same chambers that we hold our meetings.
How did
Um,
it feel sitting in that front row?
well, as many of you may know, I'm the only council member that has a child in BUSD school. So I get I get all the emails from the school district, and I watch their policies, not as an outsider, but somebody who is directly affected by those policies. So when I go down to the school board, and I try to keep it very limited because it's not my jurisdiction. When I go down there, I have two hats on. I'm the mayor, but I'm also a parent of a child that for 5 days a week through the school year, I give over to the school district, and I have faith that they're doing the right thing. And I know all the school board members. I talk to them. They're friends. For me, I went down there that day because for two reasons. One, there was a discussion on a housing issue. Got a little bit blown about build a bunch of housing on a school site, which
Which was not on the agenda, of course.
is not on the agenda, of course. We see a lot of that these days. um, what we've been dealing with in terms of housing at the city council has been way more intense than one night at the school board. So I went down there to assure the residents that we're working hand in hand with the school board. Meetings with them all the time. I know all of the. I text each one of them. I have their cell phone numbers. Um, if there's any issue, if there's any problems, ways of mitigating things. There's ways of partnering. So I wanted to go down there and reassure folks that the school board is not off on some random tangent. They are looking at things correctly. They have experienced staff members. They have experts, and they can talk to the city when they need to. So that was the first impetus for me to go down there. The second was um, last week I was at, sorry, 2 weeks ago I was at Glendale Unified, and the week before that I was at Satakoy Elementary. Um, People may have been seeing this online. There is a strong proponent of anti-LGBTQ advocates who are showing up at different school districts. This week was in Temecula. They drove all the way down to Temecula, and they are preaching a kind of anti-LGBT stance, and doing so with a clear goal in mind. There is this ideology that is saying the school district and the elected school board members have radically changed our education programs in these cities and are, ruining children's lives. And so the only answer is to get your kids out of the school district, put them into private school, and have the cities and the school district fund that transfer. And we know that at the end of the day, this is the ideology to take money out of the public schools and put them into private schools. Now, granted, we know that these private schools don't teach everything. Very narrow. And I'm not saying all private schools like this, but there's a handful that try to limit, the progressive understanding of where people come from and who they are. I mean, it was a fight in Burbank just to get our district to recognize the Armenian genocide and make sure that it was part of our regular curriculum. And so my whole problem with what's happening is that these anti-LGBTQ folks are targeting Armenian families, and they're trying to get our Armenian families in Burbank and Glendale to go against their school boards. And we have Armenians in Burbank School Board, Glendale School Board. There's no way that we're not addressing these issues and talking to the families. And I'm Greek, right? So, Armenians are like my cousins. I grew up in the Orthodox Church. Eastern Orthodox churches have very close-knit communities. And for me to see this happening in real time, it's very disheartening. When I knocked on doors, most of the voters I talked to were Armenian. We have a huge contingent in this city, but I knew that my background, my heritage, my name would resonate with these voters. So I went out and I talked to them about their issues. And not once have I met a family that was worried that their kids were going to be exposed to some radical ideology in Burbank schools or even in Glendale schools now. Everything is age appropriate. Everything is certified by the school board, by the state Department of Education. If anything was being taught that wasn't age appropriate, the first line of defense would be the teachers' unions. Teachers' unions would come out and say, we're not going to teach this. This is not what we're trained to do. And I've spoken with the teachers' unions. They're aghast at what is being like I don't know what the word to use. It's like lied about. It's a lie. Saying XYZ is being taught in the schools, and every single teacher I've talked to is like, no, that's impossible. We don't do that. None of that is happening.
Well, that brings up a question because you were at that meeting at the school board. You were at your meeting last week. Greg and I look back at council meetings. There used to be a decorum, and it's so sad to see. And as Craig pointed out, when our president is giving a state of the,
State of the Union,
and you have, senators.
Congress people just yelling,
Booing and
which has never
cheering.
happened until
Last week, you
last
had
4 or
to
5
stop
years.
several times. A school board meeting. Now, see, the camera both didn't show the audience, but I knew you had a full house. But both meetings, and these people, I don't understand. This is not a free for all, folks. We have to have some decorum. You were in a dignified. They've just changed our city hall. And as you know, you've taken enough abuse up there. I call it abuse sometimes. Craig and I watch it. The other night at the school board, we heard what people were saying. It just has changed, and it's so unfortunate.
I call it the Trump effect.
Well,
Well, yeah, that's
exactly.
pretty much what it is.
Yeah,
It's and it's that 20% of the population that lives eats and dies what he does, then that becomes their no mode of operation.
And once you take the step to undo the decorum, the next step for you is to simply ignore the democratic ideals and institutions. That is why we saw so many people on January 6th march on the Capitol. Because to them, the institutions mean nothing. The decorum, the rules, how to follow the procedures, they've thrown that out the window. Because that's what he did. He never paid his taxes. He never followed the rules. He did everything that he could to cheat and win, and people see the winning as the end goal. But once you've let go of everything else,
I think it's going to catch up with him pretty soon. I think
Well, people don't understand. You will have, I forget when it's on the calendar, a joint school board and Burbank City Council meeting. When people say, "Do they even talk to each other?" Yes, they do.
all the time.
They sit next to each other at at a council meeting, and there's an agenda of what you're going to discuss. There's things that have been brought up. That's the time and place, and I guarantee, I don't know if the city council will be filled that night, but you hope, if it is, I hope people just realize where you are, and you're there. I understand when you get up to that podium, it has happened to me. It's hard to speak sometimes. Some people are very passionate, and the tears start flowing and so forth. And I get it, but I'm sorry, when you're sitting in the booing and the clapping and the yelling, that's uncalled for.
Yeah. And back in the day, when I first started coming to city council meetings, 2016, there would be maybe one or two comments in a night that might be off topic, but it was rare even then. And everyone in the room would roll their eyes because they know that same person is coming up and doing their thing. Now it seems like everybody's emboldened to simply throw decorum out the window and get on their soapbox and think that if I say the most outlandish thing possible, that's what's going to change voters' minds. I don't know who they're talking to, because everyone I talk to after the fact comes to me and says, "Who was that person?" They sounded like they were so uninformed and so outlandish. It turns voters off. People are more likely to come out against that person because they are so radical.
Well, there has always been those glad flies. Craig and I go back in the days. We had a guy, Mel Perlich,
Jules Kemet.
He'd sit in that front row with his big sign, and he'd get up there, and he knew what he was talking about. He did his homework. And then there was Mike Nolan.
Yeah.
Mike had a history of the city.
Yeah, and Mike and I talked many times. I would say, Mike, don't go up there yelling and screaming. I go, your message is so good. You really know what you're talking about. Just go up there and just talk, because you lose the message when you do the antics.
And then, and I tell Mike all the time, like, you can't target individual people. You can't go after staff. You can't do that because you lose the rest of the folks
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
agree with you, because they don't want to be associated with you anymore. But
Okay. Well, last thing I have for you actually is, we have, summer starts tomorrow on the June equinox on June 21st, and it's summer season. But there's another season called councils and boards and commissions.
yes,
And every year you are inundated with so many different types of agenda. Every board and commissioner is basically up in to get reelected or whatever, or reappointed, I should say.
sure.
So you have to go through a lot of applications. Number one, how long does that take? Number two is, what are you looking for in an application that would really, set something, tell yourself, hey, this is something I need to really look at here.
Craig and I looked at some of them, like your water and power board. You got to be able to add 2 and 2 to get to 7.
Yes.
And I looked through some of those applications, not for Water and Power Board, but for a couple of the other commissions. I give the people the credit for filling out the app and so forth. And I do like the idea, I do and I don't, that you got to give other people time. People have sat on some of these boards, and it's time to let's get some new blood. Just new blood means new ideas. But I looked at some of those applications and, if I don't get put on this commission, I want to be on this commission, this commission, this commission,
Right. Right.
and all of them had application for each. But I'll tell you, some of those resumes are 3, 4 pages long. I don't know how you do it.
So I actually like experience. I tend to reappoint somebody if they've been doing a good job. I have to have a reason not to appoint somebody personally. Um, Unfortunately, we we as the city are looking at term limits on the boards and commissions, so that I might make that job harder for myself, um, having to force myself to reappoint somebody or pick somebody new. But for me, some of the boards and commissions need a resume. I was just talking with somebody the other day who applied to Parks and Rec and Infrastructure Oversight, or sorry, and Planning Board. And I talked to this person, and they were saying, "Yes, I'm a big sports and fitness person, and I do all this stuff with organized teams and all of this." And I said, "Oh, okay, great. That's wonderful. That's going to move you up my list on what kind of background do you have in planning, urban design, or architecture?" They were like, "Oh, well, I studied sports medicine in school." Okay, so have you served on any?
I live in a house.
I live in a house, and I did some work on my deck. Like, okay, well, look, here's the deal. I like you for Parks and Rec, and I'm going to leave it at that. um, people, if you've never been on the board, you don't know what it is. So obviously, you're going to get people applying who don't have the background or the experience to do it, and that's fine. I think I have done enough of these where I can pretty much weed those people out very quickly. My biggest issue is coming down to a seat or two where there's multiple really great. Now I'm stuck. Like, oh wow, which person do I want in this? And so at that point, I start to look at diversity of experience. Do I want to appoint two people who both come from an architectural design planning board? Well, maybe I want one with architecture and one who's actually worked in construction. Oh, you're an actual person, you're a carpenter. Maybe that's the better mix and match kind of thing. So I try to do that as well. In addition, I like to look at folks who have worked on things in multiple fields related. If you've had just one job that you've done forever, but you've never served on any other nonprofit or any other commission or something like that, to me, that seems a very narrow scope. I'll put you on there if I don't have anybody else, but if I've got somebody who's had a job here, worked on a nonprofit there, maybe transferred to another position here, like, okay, I want to see a varied kind of thing. That's but see, that's very personal to me because I've had like a dozen jobs in
We
my
you
life.
were you started on which commission? Transportation?
Started in transportation. I've only ever been
I
on
I
transportation.
remember. I
Yeah.
remember.
Yeah.
But again, that was way before your leadership Burbank class
Yep.
years.
Yep.
So you looked at it totally different. Um, it's funny, Craig being a coach, and we talk about it all the time. You almost have to, if you're going to serve on a board or commission, either have played a sport or been on a sport because it takes that teamwork. I know Leadership Burbank, they teach that, but I mean, some of these people that have never played a sport and they're out there in left field, you can tell when they're sitting on a board, you got to have that coherent,
Got to be able to work with others. I got appointed to Transportation Commission simply on the fact that I lived 8 years without a car. And at the time of my application, I was a full time Uber driver. So I'd spent 8 years without a car and then immediately went to driving full time. So, like, I had the two extremes. And so I pitched that. That's what I pitched. I said, I know how people bike and walk to work. I also know how people get around with a car. I do it all day long. I can bring that experience, and I'm a great team player. And I got in the commission.
you meet people? Do you meet with people? I know some of the council members do.
Sometimes it's
Or-
usually a phone call. I can
Okay.
get it over in a phone call. I don't need to like sit down. Because it's more about it's a resume, right? It's not how do I feel about. I'm not going to be working with them, right? That's up to the commission.
I think one of the questions you should always throw into people, you know where Colgan Court is? Or do you know where Gaylord Street is? If you don't know Burbank, you shouldn't be sitting on a commission.
Very
It's
true.
it's an easy question. Or how many? I'm sorry, some council members don't know.
Sure.
How many fire stations do we have? How many police stations do we have? They don't get those questions right.
Well,
Maybe you should serve after you do more homework.
I ask very specific questions pertinent to the commission itself. So like, what was the last one? Someone wanted IOB, and I said, you know what Measure P is? That was my question. And almost every single one of them was like, yeah, that's our tax measure. And the money goes to infrastructure. And then I would follow up with, did you know that IOB came from Measure P? And some of them didn't know, and that's fine. But I had one person who's like, what's Measure P? I'm like, how are you going to sit on IOB and not know what we did?
I won't get into it. Ross always has a definition for that, so I
You
won't.
know, after it passed and IOB was putting money in things, you know, departments got new cameras, departments got stuff that they needed. And I always called that, wasn't that Measure P standing for piss it away?
Oh, no. You guys are going to get me in trouble.
No. That's our. We went over that last night, so
Yeah, you know,
I was
it's just-
prepared for that.
He knows that's what I think of. But you know what? Again, IOB, I'll tell you, years ago, our city would build a building and not think about the air conditioner in 15 years. And look at our streets and look at a lot of things. I don't think a lot of people listen to the, oversight board. And
I want to assure everyone watching and listening at home, the IOB, make sure that we are not urinating away any of our Measure P dollars. They look at it with a fine tooth comb. We are spending the money.
I've actually watched a couple of meetings, and agendas are very technical, and there's a lot of projects on there, and they are very responsible people. So,
oh yeah, you look at
Absolutely.
the chairman of it and so forth. I will say, you look at a building, Cambridge Park. You don't realize there's so many things. You got a pool there, you got roofing, you got building, you got floor, and that's the board that kind of really puts it.
Yeah, so planning board looks at the construction and the design and that kind of thing, and is it, matching up with what we need? But yeah, IOB does take a larger, broader look. How does it fit in? Is the sewer going to connect? Is the street going to work? All of those larger issues. They don't get too granular. That's much more for planning board. But yeah, IOB does have a bigger look, and it's these large capital projects, not just individual buildings, but like planned developments. The street and road repair, the bridges. So yeah, I think they've really hit their stride in the last year or two, and they're doing a really good job.
And as I said last night if people want to look at all those applications, it's all public information. You want to look at the resumes of some of these people, you'll be pretty surprised. But you also, whoever gets appointed, you go, wow, they really kind of deserve to be on that board.
Right.
And you also get to know these people in the city tree or whatever of how things function and operate,
Right.
how important they are.
all right. Well, we're coming to the end of our show, where we always ask you what's on the mayor's mind. Anything you'd like to say, or
Yes, I
in
do
our
want to
show?
plug a show at the
Wait,
end of.
did you collect any money? Is that oh no, he doesn't do that.
I want to plug a show at the end of this week. I'm hosting a comedy show at the Colony Theater, 7:00 Friday night. All the ticket proceeds are going to benefit the writer's strike and the folks who are striking right now. For those of you who don't know, if writers call a strike, then the writer members are not allowed to collect unemployment. So they are kind of struggling financially while they fight for better pay and better benefits. So please, I encourage everyone, come out to the Colony Theater on Friday, 7:00. It's going to be a hilarious show. There may be a few celebrity guests as well, and it's going to be a very fun
Now I've seen your show on Tuesday nights,
time.
and at least when I throw tomatoes at my TV or want to take a bat and throw them at them. But can we really maybe see you do your stand-up show
So
Friday night?
I will probably be participating in some of the comedy. It is my previous career was being in comedy, so for me it's going to be very fun to get back to that. And so yeah, if you want to see me have some fun and joke around and maybe even interact with me, I may pull people up on stage as well. So
Well, let me ask you this though: who's going to write the show? Are the writers allowed to write for their own material?
that's an excellent question. So the entire show is going to be improvised. It's going to be all made up right there on the spot. That is my guarantee to you. No writing will take place at all during the show.
So you
before
can't share anything from last week's budget session.
No.
All right. Well, we actually had a long show today, but a lot of great information, and we really appreciate you coming on, spending time with us, and answering questions from the citizens here in Burbank. So, Ross, anything else before we get off the air here?
It's funny, during last week's council meeting, people have questions. I know a couple council members gave out their cell phones and so forth, and you want people to be informed. When you come to City Hall and you get a flyer or an email that you think the sky is falling, maybe it's time that you drop a dime or an email to the mayor. We ask him to come on this show. We think it's an opportunity for the public, a different forum. Instead of going down aisle 3 at Vaughn's and asking any questions, we have people right into us. We appreciate you coming, taking the time out of your schedule. I know we've been a little slow on ribbon cuttings. I don't think I've seen you in several weeks. I have one next week, I think. But it's just a great opportunity for you to get out, another way to communicate to our community.
And you can always email citycouncil@burbankca.gov. We see those all the time, and it's checked every day.
And like I said, school board wise, city council wise, if you hear something, if it's a districting, if it's something, whatever, call the city. You and I know you follow on Facebook, and boy, they took the sign off of Kmart, and there were how many people are, are they putting a prison up there? Well, you can't do this because of the schools. You know what? In time, there's nothing right now planned for that lot. But people sure, but
Everyone was asking, and I actually made a joke. I said the only thing planned for that Kmart is a spirit in Halloween.
Is it always?
Right.
Okay, well, Mayor Anthony, thank you very much for your time, and we will talk to you again next month, right?
But yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
My Burbank Talks would like to thank all of my Burbank's advertisers for their continued support. Burbank Water and Power, Cusimano Real Estate Group, Providence St. Joseph Medical Center, Burbank Chamber of Commerce, UME Credit Union, Tequila's Cantina and Grill, UCLA Health, Gain Credit Union, Community Chevrolet, Media City Credit Union, Eric Garcia of Farmers Insurance, Providence High School, UPS Store on 3rd Street, and Hill Street Cafe.